Moshe Taragin for the OU All Parsha video series, Parshas Vayetze from Gush Etzion. So Amalek is a very incendiary topic, very confusing topic. It's normally juxtaposed to Purim, Parshas Zachor, which is of course taken from Parshas Tetze, and we collapse Amalek in Parshas Zachor into Haman and the story in Shushan. But now it's Parshas Tetze, and we're more than half a year away from Purim, close to half a year away from Purim, right about I think a half. And it's important to take a look at Amalek beyond just Purim, but of course incorporating Purim, because that's an important touchstone, important milestone in Amalek. Now what's even more important is to try to get under the hood of Amalek. Obviously this is the enemy, the devil, the perfidious enemy of Amalek. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Malchus in this world is incomplete as long as Amalek is still battling Am Yisrael. Kiyad al Keska Milchama Lashem B'Amalek Midor Dar in Parshas B'Shalach. Notice the half word or the half name of Hashem, Yud Kei, without Yud Kei Vav Kei. Chazal see this as a visual representation of Hashem's presence being strained or clipped. As long as in this world, of course, cosmically Hashem's presence has nothing to do with human decisions. And then, of course, the severity of the mitzvah of Zachar, and of course, by the way, purely halachically, it's a good chance this weekend over Shabbos in Shul, when they read Parshas Tetze, twice to have kavana to be mekayim the mitzvah, because it's not so clear for the Rishonim that you only are mekayim the mitzvah once a year. Why is it once a year? It should be every. Spill my water. Excuse me. Sorry about that interruption. It's had a little bit of an accident. My cup of water spilled. And so it's not so clear you're mekayim the mitzvah only once a year. So certainly you should have kavana this weekend, Shabbos and Mitzvah twice during the regular Kriya, and then the Kriyas Maftir to be mekayim the mitzvah, just in case. And certainly if you weren't able to be mekayim the mitzvah during Parshas Zachor, so no reason not to have kavana. But anyway, getting back to the larger question of Amalek, it's important to try to redefine Amalek, because by all accounts we've lost the nation, the ethnic nation called Amalek. By all accounts, the mitzvah, literally, to be macha emcha zecha Amalek, tafinoshim, to kill, there's no residue of Amalek, so that mitzvah is off the board. Maybe the mitzvah zechira is on the board, but the mitzvah of being macha emcha Amalek is not on the board anymore. But yet the mitzvah zechira is. And so obviously if something so central and so theological has to be something more than just the people named Amalek, who were nomads who lived in the regions of Eretz Yisrael. So one way to take it is metaphysically, and certainly those svarim that are api Kabbalah, what Amalek represents, what values, what moral perils, what elements of the Yetzer Hara of the Sitra Achra. I'm referring to the end of the Tzidkas HaTzadik, based on the pasuk in Parshas Balak, Rashis Goyim Amalek. So there's something racist about Amalek. But I want to turn this discussion more historically. Who was Amalek, and when did Amalek rear its head, and when was the great shift in Amalek? What happened at that shift? Okay, so let's start with Parshas Toldos, where all this begins. Parshas Toldos, of course, Esav is the natural heir to Yitzchak. And it doesn't work out that way. It shouldn't work out that way. He's not the appropriate person to carry on the legacy of the Avos. First, of course, when he sells the Bechorah to Yaakov, and then when Yaakov takes the bracha through his mother's intervention. And we believe the story ends there, with Esav being a little resentful and being pacified in Vayishlach. But there is a larger story unfolding where Esav doesn't just want to take revenge, but he wants to recover the Bechorah. And therefore Esav feels driven to intervene at pivotal moments in which the selection of Yaakov will be advancing, will be materializing. And that's why the two moments in Sefer Bereshis where Esav feels compelled to get involved, one is explicit, one is Chazal filling in the Medrash. The explicit moment is, of course, Vayishlach. That's not just the Esav's first chance to get back at Yaakov. This is Yaakov returning to Eretz Yisrael. The bracha / Bechorah, the future of Am Yisrael, is in Israel. If you can bar Yaakov from Israel, you're effectively sidelining him. You're keeping him out of the game. You're keeping him out of the stadium. So it's not just Yaakov happens. Why did Esav hunt down Yaakov? Esav has a lot of teams, a lot of hunters, a lot of trackers. You figure he's an Ish Sadeh. He knows how to track Yaakov. Everyone knows where Yaakov went, and Parshas told us. It's not a big secret. It's not like he's hiding anywhere. He's hiding in Esav's grandfather's house. For all goodness sakes, go to Aram Narayim, track Yaakov down, and kill him. The answer is, Esav was strategic. It wasn't about revenge as much as it's about rewriting history, revising history. If Esav can either kill Yaakov, or at least bar him from Israel, blockade Israel, 400 men, you can't go in. Yaakov's going to turn around with his tail between his legs and run back to Lavan's house. Now Chazal fill in the blanks because there's another time that Yaakov is seizing or ascending to the Bechorah, and that's when he dies. And who will be buried in Maras Machpelah will in part determine who will finally, for eternity, be the Bechor buried next to the Avos in Kever Avos. And that's when Chazal have Esav showing up with a band of militants wanting to prevent Yaakov from being buried in Maras Machpelah. And there's a very colorful story where Chushin, the son of Dan, who is deaf and doesn't really understand what's going on, decapitates Esav. These two stories, one explicitly in Vayishlach, understood not just as a revenge mission, but understood as a barring Yaakov from Israel mission. And of course, Esav showing up at Maras Machpelah parallels a very, very different story. And that's the story of Esav's grandson, Amalek. Esav's son was Eliphaz. We don't know much about Eliphaz. His name is mentioned. Chazal write him in as the person chasing Yaakov at that first moment where Yaakov flees in Parshas Toldos. There's a little exchange in Yaakov and Eliphaz. We don't really see too much about Eliphaz. But we do see is Eliphaz's son being Amalek, and the Medrash tells us, in Medrash Rabbah, Eliphaz's stepmother, even his biological mother, but one of Eliphaz's Pilagshos was Timnah. Timnah was a local princess. Chazal say, always Achos Lot on Timnah, always wanted to join Avram and his entourage. She was barred successfully by Avram and Yitzchak. She feels resentful because she's barred from joining this new monotheistic religion and race. So she sits with Eliphaz, maybe on her deathbed, but she has a nice conversation with Eliphaz, and she says, with Amalek, her son or stepson. She's a Pilegesh to Eliphaz, and she tells her stepson Amalek, or the son of her master, I want you to be the one to reverse history. I want you to be the one to chase Yaakov. So the birth of Amalek, I don't mean his biological birth, but the historical birth of Amalek is, you are designated by Esav's family, Esav's daughter-in-law / mistress, to be the one to continue this battle, Amalek, even after Esav is dead and loses that final stand. General Custer's, General Esav's last stand at Maras Machpelah. Now, Eliphaz is working with the same strategy as Esav worked with. It's not just revenge killing and not just a chance to pick off the Jews here and there, but waiting and hiding and strategically planning intervention when Jewish history leaps forward, moves forward. The first moment that Amalek appears to play that role is when we leave Mitzrayim. And remember, when we leave Mitzrayim, we are on our way to Eretz Yisrael. We expect to be there within a couple of months. Unfortunately, history was rerouted, and we only show up there 40 years later. But time is urgent, and the clock is ticking. And if we enter Eretz Yisrael, the selection of Yaakov and his children will be advanced. Now, that's why in Parshas Tetze, the story of Amalek's intervention is described Asher Karcha Baderech. Why do we care where they attacked us? So the literal reading is because we were defenseless, we were traveling. They may have been pirates who roamed the desert. They were nomads, Amalek. But the word derech has a much larger connotation. Baderech b'tzeischem Mitzrayim, we're on our way to Eretz Yisrael, which is why we get to Eretz Yisrael, we have to defeat Amalek. There's a very interesting Rashi in Parshas Tetze explaining the pasuk Vayizanev b'cha kol hanechashalim acharecha, which militarily means they attacked the rear, the zanav, the tail, and the people who were in the tail were nechashalim. Nechashalim could be weaker people that were dragging outside the machna. Whatever it means, it's a military description of their plan of attack. But Rashi quotes the Medrash that when they attacked us back in Parshas Bishalach, they cut off our milah and threw it to heaven in a way of disrespect, in a way of challenging Hashem. Why in the world? Well, look, ancient warriors did tend to desecrate bodies, put heads on spikes, crucify people, chain people, just to psych out the enemy, but it seems like this was more. If they really wanted to make a sign, it could have been less, excuse me for saying it, pornographic and less defiling. I think it would have been a head, it would have been a torso. I mean, because they are attacking the Makom Hamila, because what's at stake here is the Jewish people, the Jewish selection, the Bris Milah of Avram, who will receive the bris, who won't receive the bris. This is all a larger historical battle trying to reverse the Nakba, the tragedy of Yaakov being selected over Esav. And the next moment that Esav returns to the battlefield is a moment you may not notice. It's when Aharon dies in Parshas Chukas, and Kanani Melech Arad hears, but Rashi says it's really not Kanani Melech Arad HaYoshev Banegev, who lives in the south of Israel, Amalek Yoshev Banegev, which is how the Meraglim frightened the Jewish people. And Amalek disguises themselves as Canaanim to defend or to prevent Yaakov again from entering Eretz Yisrael 40 years later. I will talk about this later because this is more than just a military strategy. This is an extremely iconic moment in the history of Amalek, but we'll get to that later. So the point is, Amalek, the grandson of Esav, the designated hitter, the designated defender, designated reverser of the Nakba tragedy, picks his moments when they feel, their moments when they feel that Jewish history, Jewish Bechara / Bracha, is advancing. The next moment is when we appoint a king. The wheels of Jewish sovereignty are now fully in motion. King is going to lead to Beis HaMikdash, Beis HaMikdash is going to lead to sovereignty, sovereignty is going to lead to Malchus Hashem, Malchus is going to lead to Mashiach. Remember, Mashiach could have been Malchus Beis David, and these are the nascent preliminary stages. So that's why Agag, Melech Amalek, does battle. It's not clear if he provokes the battle, initiates the battle. It sounds like Shaul initiates the battle, but there's another confrontation. Agag could have surrendered, could have left the country, but Agag decides that he has to make a stand to fulfill his ancient grandfather's Amalek task of deterring Jewish history. Of course, the big battle, the battle royale, takes place in Shushan. And it's also an extremely historically sensitive moment, an intersection, because it occurs towards the end of the Galus. By Chazal's account, the Beis HaMikdash had already started to be rebuilt through Koresh's interdiction. It was delayed by opposition, and according to Chazal, the opposition was led by the children of Haman. So they're not just defeating or thwarting Jewish history by threatening genocide of the Jews, they're also actively preventing and campaigning and lobbying against the rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash. When that doesn't work, there's only one choice, that's to destroy the Jews. Again, we read Megillas Esther as more of a personal vendetta against Mordechai, but it sounds from Chazal that when Mordechai comes into Haman's grill, he then wakes up and says, wait a second, there's something larger than Mordechai, there's a people, I'm from Agag, Haman Agagi, Agag's from Amalek, I belong to Amalek, I have to be part of this battle. Now, to prevent Jewish return to Yerushalayim. Haman, though, pulls a switch. And in that switch, he radically changes the nature of Amalek, because Amalek is going extinct. Sancherib had already redistributed the populations. We don't really hear much about Amalek at that point, around the 5th century BCE. Haman is an Amalekite, but he's running around like a Persian. He's a part of the Persian political machinery, Parasumadai. What happens is that Haman pulls a switch. He doesn't try to destroy the Jewish people by using Amalek resources that just aren't. There's no Amalek standing army. There's no Amalek warriors. There's no Melech Amalek. He's an Amaleki. What he does is he drafts and he exploits and he poisons the Persian Empire, and he tries to rile them and weaponize them against the Jewish people. So there probably were some Amalekites who teamed with Haman and prepared with Haman, but it's basically the riffraff, the Hamonam, the people in the field who were Haman's co-conspirators. And here a major shift happens. Amalek is no longer a people and an army and a nation, it's now a force of hatred that surfaces in different empires towards the Jewish people and threatening the Jewish people, b'chol dar v'dar, with extinction. Now, it's hard to know, because now that it becomes a force, and we don't have Nevi'im that are charting that force, it's hard to know when that force does or doesn't emerge. I'll tell you one, I think it's clear that it emerges from the general tonality of Chazal and our Masorah. I'll speculate about some others. But it's clear that Rome is seen as that force, and then when Rome becomes Christendom in the 4th century, and then fuels Rome together with its culture, its politics, its democracy, its theology, its math, culture, science, fuels Western civilization, which then becomes Christian, that whole trifecta of Rome, Christianity, and Rome, Christianity, and Western civilization at its height of anti-Semitism in the second part of the Middle Ages, last millennia. Rashi in Parshas Vayishlach tries to connect the dots for us by saying, based on the Medrash, that Magdiel, one of the generals of Edom, Aluf Magdiel, remember Esav becomes affiliated with Edom, or Edom becomes the name of the land that Esav lives in because he was known as Edom, the Edomite, who was Edom. But one of the descendants, one of the generals, one of the leaders of Edom is Magdiel, and Rashi says Aluf Magdiel is Rome, so there's a genealogical or ethnic transference to the Romans. It doesn't have to be that way. It could just be, because remember, Haman's already recalibrating and reconstituting Amalek, not as a people, but as a force. And that's why the disguising of Amalek as Canaan, way back when, hundreds of years earlier, was so iconic, because this would be actual, not just disguising as Canaan, but inspiriting Canaan with venom, or inspiriting other nations with venom. So Rome and all of its anti-Semitism and all of Western and Christian anti-Semitism is certainly seen as the Amalek force. By extension, Germany in its attempt to, again, we don't have Chazal, and as it comes from Western, and there was deep, deep association between the German Reich and the Roman talons, the eagle, but it wasn't so much Christian-driven, although there were roots of Christian anti-Semitism. Remember, German anti-Semitism would not have been as successful as it was, had it not been for general anti-Semitism across Europe, much of which, especially in Eastern Europe, was driven by religion and through religion. Certainly Russia was that way. I think Islamic fundamentalism, any attempt to commit a mass genocide of the Jewish people, to eliminate the Jewish people, and, well, they certainly don't come from the West, they don't come from Rome, but that's how we can look at that as Amalek, as this force that surfaces within different cultures and their narratives to eliminate Jews. Not that that means that any person who is an Islamic fundamentalist has the halacha of Amalek that has to be eliminated. As I said, the halacha has long since passed, the halacha of killing them. We should kill Islamic fundamentalists who are out to kill us. We have to defend ourselves. There's no way around that. If someone who's an Islamic fundamentalist and isn't interested in harming the Jews, they just believe in deep Islamic ideas, they're not guilty of any crime, and therefore, chas v'shalom, we're not out to kill people who aren't out to kill us, unless we're protecting ourselves for our safety and our security. I wonder about Greece. I wonder about Greece only because it's before Rome, and Chazal draw lines straight from Edom to Rome, so they're pre-Rome, but they're part of Rome. Remember, in Rome there was a ceremony every year on Tisha B'Av which mocked Yaakov, which they took out the skin of Rabbi Yishmael, they paraded around the Colosseum. They actually celebrated the defeat of Yaakov and the rise of Esav. So they were aware that they were participating in a narrative that was larger than just Roman political dynamics of the 2nd century, the 1st century CE, or whatever, the Common Era. And this is the larger picture of Amalek. And that's how it becomes a force that we have to still defeat in this world to lead to Malchus Hashem, whether it's Malchus Hashem along the purely theological plane. So I think there's a battle over Malchus Hashem because Islamic fundamentalism is so deeply vandalizing and distorting and perverting the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or whether it's the defense of the Jewish people who represent Malchus Hashem, whom Amalek wants to exterminate, or a combination, which I think Islamic fundamentalism is a combination of the two. I don't think that Germany, let's say Nazi Germany, Machshemam, introduced new theological perversions. There's basically Christianity, whether Christianity is responsible for the monotheistic elements and the non-monotheistic elements. I think in Islamic fundamentalism, you have both elements of Amalek. They attempt to destroy the people who represent the HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the land of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and suggesting perverted ideas about the Ribono Shel Olam and Melech HaRachim v'HaChesed. So it's Parshas Ki Tetze, we're reading about Amalek. Something exists that's called Amalek beyond the people called Amalek. Without the people of Amalek, the mitzvah of eliminating Amalek no longer exists. However, the mitzvah of remembering Amalek and thinking about it and shaping and framing our overall struggles, be they mental, existential, be they actual, as they are in Eretz Yisrael, is certainly part of the Yad al Keis Ka Melchama Lashem Amalek Midar Ladar, Macho Emcha Zecher Amalek Mitachas Hashemayim.